Yesterday, I talked about Johnathan Kovacevic being an underrated get for the Devils. Is Paul Cotter in the same boat? Also, let's reflect on the offseason yet again. What was my favorite thing about it? And what was my least favorite thing about it in terms of the moves made by Fitzgerald? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey club play announcer, Devils Rider Pucks Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. What's on the agenda for today's episode? Well, if you missed the previous one, I talked about Johnathan Kovacevic and how I felt as though he was an underrated get for Tom Fitzgerald. When dissecting Kovacevic's game, yes, he doesn't really focus that much on offense, but he did lead the Montreal Canadiens in a few statistical categories, including plus minus and defensive point shares. I said it sort of reminded me of the impact that Ryan Graves might have, and let me just make something perfectly clear. I never said that Kovacevic was on the same level as Graves. All I said was like they show similar traits. And even though Kovacevic might not suit up in a good amount of games unless there's an injury, it still goes to show you that the Devils' blue line has gotten better in terms of depth, because that was one of their biggest issues, especially when they dealt with a few key injuries, including Dougie Hamilton and Jonas Siegenthaler. During that episode, I talked about how I didn't really focus that much on Kovacevic when the Devils first acquired him from the Canadiens, because it was really hectic around free agency time for the Devils, because the draft recently concluded. The Devils were signing all new players. They made that trade for Kovacevic, like I just mentioned. Fitzgerald had his press conference. Development camp was still going on. It was just a whirlwind, and I'm glad this week and the weeks following, we get to slow down a little bit and let's revisit some topics. In today's episode, we're going to focus on another player that I didn't really give that much attention to, and that is Paul Cotter. Now, I reacted to the trade for Paul Cotter live from the Vegas Sphere because, as you guys know, I was credentialed for the NHL draft. But I sort of had to rush it because I had limited time to plan and record my episode because they were kicking people out at a certain time. I couldn't really take my time to dissect Cotter's game, but I did provide some background information saying that he's a bottom six player. He's going to rack up the hits. He plays physical. But I talked more about the assets that the Devils had to give up to get Cotter, which was Akira Schmid and Alexander Holtz. And I stand by my original statement, which is I think the Devils sacrificed just a little too much to get Paul Cotter, but I understood the direction that Fitzgerald was trying to go. That will be the main focus in segment one. Then in segment two, let's just reflect on the offseason in general. I've been seeing a lot of Devils content creators, whether it's print or video, talking about the Devils offseason. What did they like? What didn't they like? And I just want to say, Fitzgerald, he had a goal going into the offseason and check off all the boxes because he stood by his goal. Then in the third and final segment to close things out, I'll talk about what I didn't like in the offseason, but just a spoiler alert, it has nothing to do with the moves that the Devils made because I'm actually satisfied with the moves that Tom Fitzgerald did the past couple weeks. But let's talk about Paul Cotter and let's play some sound bites from his media availability. All right, Cotter. He appeared in 76 games for the Vegas Golden Knights during the 2023-2024 season. He had 7 goals, 18 assists for a grand total of 25 points. Not really that much of an offensive asset. He does have a few power play points. 4 of his 25 points came via the power play. He scored 2 power play goals and had 2 power play assists. But I think it's safe to say that he's not going to play that big a factor on the Devils' power play, if at all, because I think the Devils have some other options to turn to. But we'll see how the lineup shakes up for Sheldon Keefe when training camp hits. Plus minus, he was tied for last on the Golden Knights roster with a plus minus rating of -11. And he was tied for Brett Howden, once again, for worst on the roster. But here's the 2 categories that I think Fitzgerald was paying attention to in terms of Cotter's game. 233 hits, second on the team, and he had a face-off win percentage of 49.1%, ninth on the team. Cotter talked about the tangibles he brings to the roster, and we know the agenda heading into the offseason for Tom Fitzgerald and company. It was to replace the production of Miles Wood and Michael McLeod, 2 players that are blue-collar type players, aren't afraid to throw their weights around, and we all know what Michael McLeod was capable of doing on the face-off. And Cotter sort of fills that hole a little bit. He's not the ideal replacement, but he certainly knows how to play physical. He talked about that during his media availability. Take a listen.
I think one of my biggest assets is being able to be, versatile and being able to play. I mean, I can play first line, I can play fourth line, second, third. I can fit a lot of different roles. So whatever is needed of me, that's what I'll do. And I think my core game itself, being physical and puck possession and high energy on the bench, that'll always be there. And hopefully I can contribute to whatever line I'm on. So
I talked about this in a prior episode. The Devils' record for most hits in a single season belongs to Blake Coleman, who had 225 during the 2018-2019 season. Now you add people like Cotter and Dillon to the mix, and they could actually break Coleman's record if they still maintain that physicality. The one thing that Cotter needs to work on is consistency and being efficient, because if you look at his offensive point shares, his defensive point shares, and I talked about his plus minus, he doesn't stick out in either category. So my thing is, like, he cannot hinder the offensive attack for Devils. Like, you can be physical, but you cannot slow down this Devils unit. And just because you don't score doesn't mean that you're a bad player, but you got to find ways to bring value to the roster without slowing it down, if that makes sense. Devils team reporter Sam Kassan put this out on X when the Devils first got him. Cotter is a big physical power forward. Played mostly third, but some second-line center for Vegas last season. Projects as a mid to bottom 6 type of player. Also cheap at $775,000 and 2 years remaining on his deal. Once again, I think that's what Fitzy was looking at. And the Devils wanted to go after Pesce and Dillon, and you're going to have to pay those players a little bit. And he also signed Nason to a 3-year deal. Getting rid of Alexander Holtz and Akira Schmid, I guess it was the easier thing to do because Schmid, pending RFA, while Schmid didn't receive a qualifying offer with the Golden Knights, he did ultimately sign there for 2 years. We'll see what happens. And Alexander Holtz was on the last year of his entry-level contract. And of all the assets on the Devils roster, probably one of the easier players to move, who has some decent upside. But let's focus just more on Cotter. Cotter talked about his motivation going into the season. Take a listen.
Obviously, Vegas drafted me and they saw something in me. And I think now that I've shown and progressed as a player that I can be in the NHL, the Devils have seen that, and for them to reach out and make a trade for me, to want me is awesome. I mean, you want to go where you're wanted, right? So for me, they've put the belief in me, and now it's time for me to give back. So I'm super pumped.
Okay, for the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about leadership and team culture within the Devils locker room. That's why they signed players like Stefan Nason, Brett Pesce, Brendan Dillon, Tomas Tatar, even though he's been here before. You're signing veteran players that have been around the block before. But of all the moves made by Fitzy this offseason, only one player has hoisted the Stanley Cup, and that is Paul Cotter. He now joins Andre Palat and Jake Allen as previous Stanley Cup winners prior to joining the Devils. Cotter was a part of that Golden Knights team that won it just a couple seasons ago. And that goes a long way, because I always talk about playoff pedigree and how it goes a long way for a young team like the Devils. But when you add championship experience as well, it plays a huge factor going into the season and beyond, especially come playoff time. While Cotter might not be the first name you think of when you look back on that Vegas Golden Knights championship run, you can't take away from the fact that he's a champion and he has his name engraved on that trophy. Cotter brings championship experience, similar to Andre Palat. Palat, not the best player on the roster, but he has that championship experience. He knows what it takes to get there. And yes, you got a player like Tomas Tatar who's been to the Stanley Cup final before. He didn't win it, and he didn't really play that much of a role with the Canadiens that season. But digressing a little bit, that's the one thing I want people to just magnify a little bit more with Cotter, which is we're talking about a winning culture in New Jersey. We're talking about changing team culture. We're talking about leadership. Cotter has won a Stanley Cup. Let's highlight that a little bit more, because that goes a long way. And we saw what happened when Palat, Haula, and Schmid signed with the Devils during the 2022 offseason. And what happened after that? The Devils had a historic season. And remember, this is a franchise that has won 3 Stanley Cups. Once again, I think the Devils still sacrificed just a little too much to get his services. But at the end of the day, they got more experience with Cotter and a few other players that have been to the playoffs many times throughout their career. And that's the takeaway I got from Cotter. He can rack up the hits. He can do faceoffs. I'm sure he's not afraid to play those dirty areas, work on being efficient and consistent, and maybe a change of scenery can help him. And he also brings championship experience. Cotter won't be the best player on the roster, but I'm sure he could play a vital role, especially since depth was a main issue of concern for the Devils just this past season. All right, we're going to talk more about the moves that Fitzy made during the offseason so far. But before we continue, let me tell you about FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up any bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Visit FanDuel.com to look at the odds. And please remember to gamble responsibly. All right. I've been inspired. I've been seeing a lot of Devils content creators share with their audience, like, what was their favorite part of the offseason? Because Fitzgerald recently revealed at his press conference that the Devils are done for the most part, because due to the cap space and also having to give Dawson Mercer a new contract, I don't think the Devils are going to make another trade or sign another player who's available in the free agent market. I think Fitzy is really satisfied with what he's put together. And in this segment, we're going to focus on the good of the offseason for Tom Fitzgerald. Let's circle back to something he said to the media a while back. What was his offseason wish list? He said he wanted to get a goalie, a top 6 forward, a bottom 6 forward, a top 4 defenseman, and a bottom 4 defenseman. I said that maybe a few of those goals will come into fruition, but I had my doubts that Fitzgerald would be able to achieve all 5 of his wishes. And he got to work, and that's exactly what he did. Before I break it down, I actually want to give a shout out to Jim Behringer, friend of the show. He's over at Full Press Hockey. He and I were covering the draft, and he was always relaying information to me. He spoke to Tom Fitzgerald, and he was telling me, Trey, the Devils are not done. This was shortly after they acquired Paul Cotter and also traded away John Marino. He said that Fitzy wants to get more grit. He wants to get more experience. And the Devils are going to be very busy come the first day of free agency. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. All right, let's go over the wish list, shall we? Get a goalie. The Devils did that with Jacob Markstrom. I've already broken it down in prior episodes, but that's exactly what happened. Top 6 forward, Tomas Tatar. I get it. People had other plans when it came to a top 6 forward. I'm sure Fitzgerald also had different plans because we were seeing the rumors that maybe Jonathan Marchessault, Steven Stamkos, whomever would show interest in the Devils. And I think the biggest one, created by Mike Rupp, was that the Devils would have a chance to get Brady Tkachuk. And I constantly said that it wasn't going to happen, at least not this offseason. But Tomas Tatar is a capable top 6 player. We've seen it happen a couple seasons ago. Can he rekindle that magic? We don't really know. But technically, Fitzgerald did get a top 6 forward. But I think that was at the bottom of his list because he said during his press conference that offense was never the issue for the Devils. And I think people need to be more appreciative of what the Devils got and not who they don't got. Be grateful for what you have is the old saying, right? Because the Devils have Jack Hughes. He could become a once-in-a-generation type talent if he stays healthy. Timo Meier, 40 goal scorers in that sort of body frame. Don't just grow on trees. Nico Hischier, one of the better two-way players in the entire league. And also Jesper Bratt had an all-star caliber season, and he is one of the more consistent players on the Devils roster. And similar to Dawson Mercer, he is an Iron Man because he suited up in all 82 games for the Devils this season and also last season. I don't think top 6 forward was the main priority for Fitzgerald, but getting a bottom 6 forward, he got 2 of them, Stefan Noesen and Paul Cotter, because both of them play physical and both of them are not afraid to throw their weights around. And like I've been saying a lot on this show, you got to replace Miles Wood. You got to replace Michael McLeod. And Cotter, he can do faceoffs. He can rack up the hits, but Noesen is the more complete player. Noesen is physical. He's electrifying. He's improved his game a whole lot the past few years. I was really inspired by his story in which he spent a season with the Chicago Wolves of the AHL, and then he was given a bigger shot the following season with the Carolina Hurricanes, and now this has led him to a 3-year deal with the Devils. I've been truly inspired by Noesen, and I'd say he's going to be one of my favorite players to watch this upcoming season. I think Noesen and Cotter, with Noesen obviously being the better player, there you go. You get your bottom 6 forward. Top 4 defensemen, he got 2, Brett Pesce and Brendan Dillon. I've already talked about both of those players, and both of them are really good. Pesce knows where to position himself, and I think he can definitely have somewhat of an impact for the Devils. Not really offensively, even though he's shown glimpses of it, but just knows where to position himself. And Brendan Dillon, physical guy. Love it. Bottom 4 defenseman, Johnathan Kovacevic. I talked about him in the previous episode. Kovacevic, very underrated. Will he play in all the games? No. But he still had a solid showing with the Canadiens. I just got to give a lot of credit where credit is due. Fitzgerald had a list going into the offseason. And he checked it once, he checked it twice, and he got to work. A goal without a plan is a wish, is the old saying. He got all of the things that he wanted to get. And not to mention, he got Sheldon Keefe. I know I've touched on this in the past, but I would say that's been my favorite part of the offseason, which is people always complain saying that Fitzy only gets half the job done. Fitzy is this, Fitzy is that. People were turning on him after people were literally saying, including myself, that Fitzy should have gotten consideration for general manager of the year. I never lost hope in Fitzy. I just said Devils had a rough season. It happens. They'll rebound from this. And I think another thing that I loved about the offseason was when I talked about Stefan Noesen and Tomas Tatar possibly returning to the Devils in a few silly season episodes and got called out on social media. But lo and behold, they reunited with the Devils, and man, did I have a field day on social media. It's all fun and games. At the end of the day, don't take it personal. It's just sports. That's all I got to say. But I love it when I do a silly season episode or a silly season discussion and it comes into fruition. So you can add that to the list. I remember talking about Timo Meier, Vitek Vanacek. I'm sure a few other players because silly season is one of my favorite things to do during the offseason. And now Nason and Tatar added to the list. And I was always talking good about Tatar. I think you would have to go back to like last August, in which I did an episode saying like I'd be open for Tatar to come back to the Devils, but just given the Tyler Toffoli situation, didn't foresee it. But welcome back, Tuna. All right. Obviously, there's a lot of good in the offseason, but what were some of the things that I didn't like about the offseason? My answer might surprise you. All right. Talked about the good. Let's talk about the bad during the offseason. And let me make something perfectly clear. This is not a jab towards anyone in particular. But when I see people on social media, when I see people on my YouTube comment section, wherever, if I see someone saying like this offseason was a fail for New Jersey, honestly, that boils my blood a little bit because it's just like the Devils did what they were supposed to do during the offseason. What made the Devils so successful during the 2022-2023 season? They had depth and they were also healthy. And this is one of their main fixes going into the offseason, which was how can Fitzgerald fill out the roster and fill in some of those missing puzzle pieces? Because losing Damon Severson, Ryan Graves, Miles Wood didn't make things easier for Devils. Running it back with Akira Schmid and Vitek Vanacek, that didn't really pan out too well, but I kind of understand the mindset. He went the cheap route, and unfortunately, it didn't pan out. And he got Jacob Markstrom to try to fix it, and Jake Allen is the backup, and I think Allen was pretty good. Fitzgerald heard the criticism loud and clear. And my thing is, like, I think if you were to ask a lot of people, they would say, like, the Devils need to improve in goaltending, and they did that. And then everything else was gravy. Like, can you add more defensive depth? Can you add more bottom six depth? The Devils did what they were supposed to do, but it just frustrates me when people find ways to criticize. Like I said, I don't think Fitzgerald's job is on the line. I think he has made all the correct moves, and now it comes down to, can this product actually work in a game? And the Devils might get off to a slow start. They might get off to a fast start. I don't really know. I'm not a fortune teller. But what I can say is, like, I think, once again, this is similar to what I said in segment 2. Don't focus on what you don't got. Focus on what you do have. Yes, would love to have Brady Tkachuk on the roster. Yes, I would love to have a few other big-name players on the roster. But the Devils do have that. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Timo Meier, Dougie Hamilton, just to name a few. I think this Devils team did what they had to accomplish during the offseason. And I think people should be a little bit more grateful. That's one of the issues I had during the offseason, which is people still weren't satisfied. Fitzy did the correct moves, and that's where I'm going to leave it at. But let me know what you think. What were some of your favorite moves that Fitzgerald made during the offseason? And where do you think the Devils go from here? Because we got a long way to go before training camp comes around. And share your thoughts on Paul Cotter and that trade in general. Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Thanks for listening. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.